Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for Protecting Americans from Extreme Heat. I'm Jill Rosenthal. I'm the Public Health Policy Director at the Center for American Progress, and I'll be moderating today's conversation. First, for a quick overview of our event, I'm going to share some brief context for the topic of today's event, and then I will turn it over to Representative Jennifer McClellan to share some remarks, followed by a fantastic panel of experts. This summer was the Earth's hottest summer on record for the second year in a row, and 2024 is on track to be the hottest year recorded. Climate change is the main driver of extreme heat, which is becoming more dangerous every year. In addition to causing disease, injury, and death, extreme heat adds $1 billion each summer in healthcare costs, just from hospital admissions and emergency department visits alone. It lowers economic productivity, and it disproportionately affects particularly vulnerable populations due to high heat exposure, pre-existing health conditions, and other underlying social and economic inequities. The issue is daunting and makes action even more urgent. This summer, the Center for American Progress released a series of products, including reports, fact sheets, and videos that elevate policy proposals to protect those who are particularly vulnerable to extreme heat and to make progress in reducing pollution that increases extreme heat and accelerates climate change. So we're going to talk about some of those proposals in our discussion today. To start off our conversation, I'd like to introduce Representative Jennifer McClellan, who is a champion on this issue. Representative McClellan entered the U.S. Congress in 2023 after serving the Greater Richmond area in elected office in the Virginia House of Delegates and the Virginia State Senate for nearly 20 years. In her years in the Virginia General Assembly, Representative McClellan championed landmark bills to protect and expand voter rights, combat climate change, preserve reproductive health care, enhance workers' protections, and labor rights. In July of this year, Representative McClellan led efforts to introduce a resolution recognizing the threat of extreme weather to children's health and well-being and calling for rapidly and equitably deploying solutions to address the unique vulnerabilities and needs of children.
Good afternoon, and thank you to the Center for American Progress for hosting today's important discussion on the need to protect Americans from extreme heat, and for your ongoing leadership to protect the planet and promote peace and shared global prosperity. Your invaluable work strengthens our collective efforts to build a future that supports every American and cultivate a healthy environment where all can thrive and succeed. The climate crisis worsens with every given day, and the impacts become more apparent as extreme weather events increase in severity and frequency. In my home state of Virginia, we've experienced devastating wildfires, sea level rise, flash floods, and record breaking heat waves, and these problems are felt across the nation. Heat waves kill more people than any other type of severe weather or climate disaster and can lead to a wide array of heat-related injuries. Extreme heat also jeopardizes entire ecosystems and threatens the biodiversity of our planet, as plants and animals are forced to contend with changing environments and irregular weather patterns. The climate crisis threatens the health and lives of every child, every American, and everyone on our planet. And that threat will continue to grow without immediate, decisive action. I am part of a very small club in Congress, one of the 6.8% of members who are mothers to young children, and one of the less than 3% of members who are mothers of color to young children. And as a mom to a 14 and 9-year-old, I work every day to take action against the climate crisis to ensure a healthy, livable planet for them and their children. For too long, vulnerable populations have borne the brunt of our worsening climate and environmental degradation, including low-income communities, communities of color, and other vulnerable populations. Too often, though, the adverse impacts of the climate crisis on our children are not addressed, Babies, children, and adolescents are particularly susceptible to the adverse health impacts caused by extreme weather, including heat stroke, exhaustion, respiratory and cardiovascular issues, and more. The impacts of extreme heat become apparent even when our children are on the playground, where they run the risk of serious burns from playground equipment. Children today also face record rates of climate anxiety, the fear that their future will be worse than their parents due to the climate crisis. And those concerns are not unwarranted. But we are fighting to address the climate crisis and ease its physical and psychological impacts on our youth. Thanks to the leadership of the Biden Harris administration and the hard work of congressional Democrats, we have taken historic actions over the past 3.5 years to address the climate crisis and supercharge our transition to a clean energy future. The Inflation Reduction Act, passed in 2022, represents the largest federal investment in climate change mitigation and clean energy technologies in our nation's history. And as we implement the historic provisions from that bill, Americans across the nation are experiencing the benefits. Everything from electric vehicle tax credits to electrifying our federal fleets, home energy efficiency upgrades, robust investments in other clean energy technologies, and widespread efforts to advance environmental justice and protect historically underrepresented and overburdened communities. We can't stop now. We must continue working to implement provisions of the IRA and take additional steps to combat rising temperatures and preserve our planet for future generations. As parents, we have a responsibility to ensure a healthy, livable environment for our children and grandchildren because there is no planet B. I will continue fighting in Congress to advance forward-looking policies that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, ease our reliance on fossil fuels, and invest in greener, more sustainable energy sources. And I look forward to continued collaboration with environmental champions, advocacy organizations, and other leaders like the Center for American Progress. I thank you for creating space for this important conversation and your ongoing efforts to combat extreme heat. Please know that my door is always open and you have a partner in Congress. Thank you.
Representative McClellan has raised some important policies and programs that we will delve into further today with a conversation with our panel. So I would welcome our panel members to come on camera, and I'm excited to introduce them. Mayor LeVar Stoney is serving his second term as mayor of Richmond, Virginia. He serves as an advisory board member of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, where he chairs the Children, Health, and Human Services Committee, and as vice president of the Democratic Mayors Association. He previously served under Governor McAuliffe as the first African-American Secretary of the Commonwealth. Mayor Stoney has made investing in children and families his top priority. We also have Dr. David Michaels, who is an epidemiologist and professor of environmental and occupational health at the Milken Institute School of Public Health at George Washington University. He previously served as Assistant Secretary of Labor for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, and as Assistant Secretary of Energy for Environment, Safety, and Health. Worker safety and health is one of his priority areas of focus. Next, we have Reverend Terrance McKinley, who is a national leader in advocacy, public policy, mobilizing, campaigns, racial justice, and civil and human rights. He's currently the Vice President of Movement Building and Strategy at the National Black Child Development Institute, where he works to improve outcomes for children and families through national advocacy and community engagement. Reverend McKinley is also the senior pastor of the historic Campbell AME Church in Washington, D.C. And finally, we have Dr. John Balbus, who is the director of the Office of Climate Change and Health Equity and the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Climate Change and Health Equity. He has served as Department of Health and Human Services principal to the U.S. Global Change Research Program and co-chair of their working group on climate change and human health, Senior Advisor for Public Health to the Director of the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, Chief Health Scientist at the Environmental Defense Fund, and Associate Professor of Environmental and Occupational Health at the George Washington School of Public Health. So welcome, panelists. Thank you all for being with us today. Reverend McKinley, can you talk a little bit about what unique health and social conditions lead these populations to be more vulnerable?
Sure. Well, my thanks to you, Jill, and thank you to the Center for American Progress. We at the National Black Child Development Institute believe that Black children and families are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of extreme heat due to systemic inequities. And so, systemic inequities in housing, systemic inequities in healthcare, the lack of access to green spaces and safe spaces to play, but also that Black children and families, many of them live in urban areas across the country that don't have adequate tree cover, and are especially susceptible to these issues. A good way to describe this is that in these urban areas, many of them live in apartment buildings that don't have proper heating and cooling systems. And without those heating and cooling systems, during summer months when temperatures spike and you would look for rest from the summer heat, those children and families are left to deal with stifling temperatures in their apartments without the adequate green space and parks in neighborhoods that have been exposed to disinvestment. Their parks are not up to par, overgrown grass and trees. And so playgrounds that are not properly, do not have the proper equipment. And so there's no place for them to then go to cool themselves, even in those times, and to play. And so we truly believe that there is a need to address the systemic impacts of that lead to the challenges that are faced, particularly by Black communities and Black children.
Thank you for that. So I'd like to ask each of you what your top priorities are for future action and what you see as some pivotal actions that individuals and communities can take, as well as policy solutions. So feel free to take the question where you would like to. And I'd like to start with Reverend McKinley.
Sure. No, thank you for the question. So at NBCDI, we believe that the way to address the impacts of extreme heat particularly on Black children and families, are related to our 8 essential outcomes at NBCDI. And each of our 8 essential outcomes are designed to create communities that are healthy communities, safe environments for Black children and families. Of those 8 essential outcomes, I would say that there would be a number of priorities that we would name as an organization. One, I would say that access to cooling, equitable housing and spaces and places where children and families have the cooling systems that they need in order for them to protect themselves from extreme heat. Number 2, I would say workplace and caregiver provisions and policy, making certain that caregivers are given access and have the ability to access all of the essential roles that help them with to do their particular work. Many of those caregivers work outside. I would also say expanding access to healthcare. And so, as we've heard named in this panel discussion, that the impacts of extreme heat heighten, exacerbate existing health issues like asthma and other related issues. We also know that chronic heat stress impacts Black children in profound ways. It impacts their ability to perform in schools. It also impacts their long-term well-being, creating other types of health challenges. And so we need to, in our communities, we need to make certain that we're expanding that access to healthcare. And then the last thing that I would just name, as a national organization with more than 25 affiliates across the United States. When we talk to our community leaders, we believe in a bottom up, bottom sideways approach to the work that we do. We also need to make certain that we're investing in intersectional community driven solutions. I'm so glad to hear some of the recommendations of the ways that government and civil society and the nonprofit sector can work together. Truly, we believe that is so important. And I would just encourage this audience, one way that you can be a part of the solution is to join the NBCDI. If you're in one of the areas where we have a village or an affiliate, I would encourage you to join a BCI village or to be or to join our national office as we're working to impact not only the conditions that we face, but also the systems that allow these conditions to thrive.